Don't let the elitists tell you that you don't have what it takes to raise your own kid. You don't have to be a dentist to choose your child's dentist. You don't have to be a surgeon to choose your child's doctor. You don't have to be an engineer to figure out who your math teacher is going to be. You are the best educator your child's ever going to have.
Welcome back to the Open Ed Podcast. Today I've got Corey DeAngelis with me. Welcome to the Open Ed Podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. And thanks for getting the name right on the first time.
It was luck. So Corey is a well-known school choice evangelist. He's a senior fellow at the American Culture Project, fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research, executive director of the Economic Freedom Institute. You're involved in lots of organizations, lots of efforts all around school choice, education freedom. And you have a pretty recent book called The Parent Revolution. I want to start there. I love the title of your book. It's not the education revolution. It's not about policy revolution. It's not about the system. It's about the parents. What is different about what's happening now, this parent revolution, from various times? I remember in the 90s, there was a big push for vouchers, like education reform. There've been these kind of waves. This one seems different, and I'm hinted at it. I think it's in the name. Give me your take on what's different about what's happening now.
Yeah, it is different. And we're winning so much, Isaac. I'm almost getting tired of winning. Almost. We're not done yet. We have to get states like California and New York to get across the finish line. It's red states that are going all in on school choice right now. And for listeners, the way I would define school choice is, in the current system, the status quo is that you have to go and send your kid to a school just based on your address, and your taxpayer dollars have to go there too. And if you want to opt out, you want to go to a private school, you basically have to pay twice, once through the tax system and again out of pocket. Or if you want to get access to a better quote unquote public school, you have to basically move residences so that you're assigned to a better institution, which makes no sense. It creates a lot of monopoly power. And school choice is any policy that allows some of that funding that's meant for your child to follow you to a school that isn't your assigned government-run school. So it creates more competition. It allows families to be in the driver's seat to direct that funding to institutions that align with their values, or even a homeschool situation as well. And so what's happened differently over the past few years is that, well, the teachers unions really stepped on a rake when they fought to keep schools closed during the COVID era. They held children's education hostage. They knew they could leverage those closures for extorting more money from taxpayers. They ended up getting about $190 billion in so-called COVID relief. It had nothing to do with safety. The science clearly showed that the schools should have been the first things to open and the last things to close. Yet we had the grocery stores open, the bars open, we had private schools open, but the government schools were closed because they had no incentive to do the right thing and listen to parents. So families got the short end of the stick in the short run. But in the medium to long term, the teachers unions overplayed their hand because they showed parents, one, the school system doesn't care about them all that much, but two, perhaps more importantly, they opened the eyes of parents like never before. Parents got to see what was happening in the schools, and too many had far left indoctrination happening in the classroom. Families got to see this over Zoom school. It was a failure in a lot of ways, but it revealed a lot of things. Parents didn't like critical race theory. They didn't like gender ideology. And so those parents showed up at school board meetings, which was what they were told to do all along. The teachers unions have always told us that the public schools have quote unquote democratic accountability. Well, we saw how that worked out. The long story short is that it did not. They labeled parents as domestic terrorists. They even created a threat tag at the FBI specifically for parents protesting at school board meetings. But now the parents have woken up. They're never going back to sleep. And although the only special interest group that had ever been involved in education represented the employees in the system, now we have a new one. There's a new sheriff in town. They're called parents. They're fighting back. They're winning at the ballot box. And now in the past 4 years, we've had more advancement on school choice than in the preceding 4 decades. I wish Milton Friedman were alive today to see his ideas finally coming to fruition. We now have 17 states, New Hampshire being the most recent this month, going all in, meaning all families, regardless of income, background, zip code, they can now take their state-funded education dollars to the school that works best for them. And if that's the public school, fine. Look, if you like your public school, you can keep your public school for real this time, unlike with your doctor. But the public schools do get better in response to competition, and the fear-mongering from the teachers' unions, that evidence has never come out in public. There's been 29 studies on the topic, 26 of them positive. More school choice. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. The unions actually have to think about how they're going to spend that money. They shape up, or else they're going to have to close down.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to dive a little bit more in a minute into some of the things that became, I think you called it a transparency event from COVID. But first, just one of the things you said right away about the current system, sort of the status quo system, where it's, by zip code and whatever. Matt makes this point in the book, Open Education, that we recently released, that people talk about public education like it is like there's no pricing mechanism. It's just free across the board, and therefore it's got equal access. And he's like, no, there is tuition. It's called the house prices in your zip code. The better schools have houses that only some people can afford in those districts. And so, like, we know this about markets. When you remove the ability to shop and use prices as a signal, like direct money prices for an item, prices and rationing will still occur, and they'll come out like squeezing a balloon. They'll come out in weird directions and other unintended
look at the
ways.
realtors. The realtors use the school ratings in order to sell houses. So that is tuition by mortgage. You buy yourself into the fancy public schools by buying an expensive house. And so that is a discriminatory system. It discriminates on the basis of zip code. They're not public in any meaningful sense of the word. They're private institutions that charge this indirect tuition. And in some cases, they charge tuition directly. I live in Texas, in San Antonio, and there's a school district right next to me called Alamo Heights. It's known as like one of the best school districts in Texas. Public school districts, we should call them government school districts because they're not open to all. And they charge families, in addition to what you're spending on the school that you're not going to send your kid to, if you want to transfer in, you have to pay over $10,000 per student per year. That's a ton of money, considering we're already paying for another school we're not using through taxes. And they even go further than that. They also say that they can reevaluate the student each year based on their disciplinary records, their test scores. So even if you can buy your way in, they have all these other ways to exclude children. So these schools are run by the government. They're compelled by the government. They're funded by the government, or at least the taxpayer, that the government takes the money from. They are assigned by the government, and they're regulated by the government. So we should call them government schools as opposed to public schools. But at the end of the day, the money's supposed to be meant for educating the child. So it should follow them to the school that best meets their needs and aligns with their values. And thankfully, 17 states are figuring that out. Some better than others. Arizona and Florida are doing better than my home state of Texas. But Texas just got started this year. We passed a program that's universal and that everybody can apply. No income caps or anything. But it's only limited to about 100,000 kids in the initial year, which is only about 2% of the 6 million school-age population in Texas. It's not utopia, but it is a step in the right direction. It's a great move towards truly universal school choice like they have in Arizona and Florida. And it's an education savings account, which is kind of this new wave of school choice where we used to talk about vouchers, where you could basically only use that money at a brick and mortar private school, but now you can use it for a whole host of approved education expenses, including homeschool curriculum, micro schools. And so it really opens up the supply of providers of education, which is really important for rural areas too, because in Texas, we had school choice blocked for a long time because Republicans voted with a lot of the Democrats, all the Democrats. There were 21 Republicans from rural areas in 2023 who voted against their own party platform issue with school choice. Thankfully, 2/3 of them lost their seats in the primaries, and we got a new makeup of a House that ended up passing school choice this year. But 6 of the 7 remaining guys who kept their seats, they ultimately voted for school choice this year as well. So the political winds are shifting on our side. But when you have an ESA, that argument that, oh, well, we don't have a lot of choice in rural areas, so therefore we don't need to vote for it, that kind of falls flat on its face, because now you can use this funding for providers that have lower startup costs and that can exist regardless of geography.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you change where the funds go first and how the funds are allocated, or who gets to choose where the funds go, you have all these downstream effects, and suddenly education starts to look like what's been happening in the rest of the market for at least 20 years, which is kind of this unbundling, and all these new combinations become possible. And to say like, oh, the money gets to go to whatever school they choose, even that is actually narrower than what's really happening, because the word school, it hardly applies anymore. I live in Florida and we homeschool, I guess, but it's like my daughter just started attending a 3-day-a-week school. There's 2 days and then an optional middle day where you can do sports, but then she also plays volleyball at a different private school. And then there's a public school where she went to a volleyball camp, and like, then she'll do a few things on Khan Academy or something. I don't even know what to call it. It's not really a school. It's not quite homeschool.
Hybrid homeschool / private school.
Yeah. Like, that's why we're like, education is just opening up so fast that the boxes don't matter. And that's what happens if parents get to take that money where they want. We see new formats that we just didn't even know about before.
That's right. And ESAs have been used, these education savings accounts, which I believe Milton Friedman called multi-use vouchers, if we kind of changed the name. But you can roll over the funding from year to year. It's directed by the parent in a savings account. It's the money that would have followed you to the government school. You can now direct the funding. But you're right. It's not even like public versus private anymore, because you can use that funding partially at a public school for certain classes if they allowed you to do that. And you could use some of the funding for home-based education or a private school course. Not as many families are doing that right now, but I believe that's the future of education. And especially when I think about how, I learned things today and how all of us learn before we go to school. And even when I was in school, I went to public schools, government schools. I'm sorry if I have any mistakes on this podcast. That's probably why.
Well, I was homeschooled and I make mistakes too. So
there you go. So I went to government schools all through K through 12. And when I would learn things, it was usually I'd go home and read about it, and then I'd come to class prepared. And so I didn't really feel like I was absorbing the information while it was trying to be force fed down my throat in the class. Instead, it was based on interest. It's based on my own time when I want to do it. And that's how human beings learn. I mean, how do people learn how to walk without the government? How do kids learn how to talk without the government? The reality is most of our learning, even with the status quo, happens outside of the government school system anyway. So it should be self-directed. And in Arizona, they've been using these ESAs for over a decade now already. And they've been funding these micro schools where they've had 5 to 10 children together in a household, basically economizing on the process of homeschooling. Teachers benefit too, because now they have more autonomy. Yeah. They have smaller class sizes. They can make the same amount of money or even more. Actually, broken clock is right twice a day. The Washington Post, of all places, wrote about this occurrence during the COVID era. In New Jersey, they were covering a public school teacher out there who had been in the system for decades, decided to leave the government school system and create her own micro school. She was making the same amount of money as a tenured school teacher, and had a fraction of the class size, I believe like 10 as opposed to 30. And she didn't have to deal with all the red tape in the government school system. So this isn't just a win for parents and students. I think that's the most important win. But it's also happens to be a win for the employees too, because you have less red tape, you have more competition in the labor market too. I mean, the government school system's a monopoly, but it's also a monopsony in that they don't have to spend any of those additional dollars wisely. They don't put it towards the classroom. It doesn't go towards the teachers, and they don't have to treat their teachers well because if you want to be a teacher, where else are you going to go? Basically, the government has most of the market.
I love that point, and it helps reveal that, it's easy to talk about different actors in the economy as if everybody is like one thing and they're in their little box. Like, okay, teachers are the providers of education, they're over here. Parents and students are the consumers. But all of us play all of these roles all the time. Like most teachers also have children. Most parents are have the ability and skill of teaching at least some things. And when you get to kind of break down, if the only option is full-time teacher that goes through the traditional licensure and that's your full-time job, or no teaching at all, you're losing this massive part of the market. And you look at things like OutSchool or some of these homeschool co-ops where it's like someone who's a stay-at-home mom, they can't afford to only be a stay-at-home mom. They need to work at least part-time, but they don't want to work full-time. They want to raise their kids. They can go and be a teacher X number of hours a week themselves on OutSchool or with a micro school. Like what teaching is, those teachers were like, I like teaching, but I wish I could do it like 2 days a week instead of 5.
Yes, the gig economy. It's why people like to work for Uber. You can have your full-time job and also do that. A lot of teachers, they do Uber during the summer because they're not working the full calendar year. They can make some extra money that way or on the weekends. And I was just talking to someone yesterday, actually, who's starting this kind of new company to link education providers with consumers of education, the parents and their kids. And it basically reminded me of the Uber of education. I know there's been other startups trying to do the same thing, but basically, yeah, you're trying to find, an expert math teacher or something. You can do that and you can use the review system to figure it out. And with ESAs, I would imagine at some point you can start paying for these services. And I bet you in some states they already allow it.
Yeah, I know OutSchool, like what I've used it several times. I know that most ESAs will cover OutSchool. It's so cool. The little niche things you can find. I've done it for hair braiding that my daughter wanted to learn. I've done it for Minecraft mods that my son wanted to learn. So the pandemic, I want to just get back to this for a second. I don't want to confuse correlation with causation, but it seems really interesting that we had this crazy experience for several months, sometimes much longer, where education was like totally different than it had been for decades and decades. There was this like stop. There was this, everyone's at home, you're doing online, you're scrambling. Within a couple years after that, like 14 states in a single year, 17 in a couple years past. Have we ever seen a policy change that quick in that many states? I have to think something about what happened during the pandemic with education made the Overton window shift. Is it like, what do you see? What specifically about the pandemic? You alluded to some of the things kind of helped this parent revolution get started.
Yeah, I was just reading something in the 74 this morning. It was someone who was arguing against school choice, but they said the headline was something along the lines of, school vouchers in recent years have been the biggest policy shift in U.S. education in a century. I'm like, yes, we're winning. This is the way. Keep it going. We're not done yet. Keep the foot on the gas. But it was because the teachers unions fought to keep the schools closed. They lost the trust of parents. I mean, you look at places like Chicago, they had their union tweet out. They later deleted it that, quote, the push to reopen schools is rooted in sexism, racism, and misogyny. But because this, I mean, it just they threw every buzzword at the wall.
Isn't that implying that every time your kid is in school, it like, wait, don't we want them to go back
I had
to school?
replied to their post with a screenshot from CNN of all places, citing a study showing that if anything, the school closures hurt non-white students the most and low-income kids the most. And so they ended up deleting the tweet shortly after. They had egg on their face. But so this hurt the unions in the realm of public opinion, and that, decreased confidence, especially among conservatives in the public school system. I believe the latest Gallup polling showed 9% of conservatives reporting that they had confidence in the public school system, and that was at an all-time low. And so conservatives were especially upset because they witnessed firsthand left-wing indoctrination in the schools, whether it was anti-Trump sentiment, whether it was critical race theory, divisive concepts, or gender ideology in the schools. Most parents, especially ones who had their kids in A-rated schools, thought things were okay. They thought the schools were focused on math, reading, and writing. And even independents and Democrats don't want schools focused on a lot of this political nonsense. They just want their kids to get a great education. They don't want.
I think that's a key point. Real quick, I want you to finish your thought, but it's not even so much about what is the right thing to teach and the wrong thing to teach.
Yep.
It's about where is that decision coming from and who's watching. It's like if you put in any business, if you put a bunch of people in a closed building for decades and basically guarantee them funding and have no customer choice and just essentially assume they're doing a good job because it's fun to go to the football games, everyone's going to start to deteriorate and get used to doing whatever they want to do. And when people see it and say, wait a second, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Like the mechanism of helping shift, it seems like you should have lots of different schools that have different curriculums in lots of different directions based on the population, the needs and desires of the students and the parents, instead of like this uniform thing that almost nobody likes, you know?
Exactly. It's not one size fits all. It's one size fits none. We should let 1,000 flowers bloom instead. And, by definition, the system is set up to fail because families are fundamentally going to disagree about how they want to raise their kids and how they want them to be educated. And that's okay. It's okay to have these disagreements. What's not okay is in the status quo, we force millions of families, particularly low-income families, to send their kids to institutions that fundamentally are misaligned with their values. And it's not even a tyranny of the majority, it's a tyranny of the minority. It's not that a majority of parents are inflicting their will on others. It's typically a small group, the special interest in the teachers unions, people like Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle, the radicals at the fringe of society, determining how to mold the minds of other people's children. And that is the problem. And I think the only way out of this through freedom as opposed to force is allowing families to choose schools that align with their values. That way, there's no control of other people's kids. It's you deciding for your own children. That's how it ought to be. Parents should be in the driver's seat. And this should be appealing to people on the left and the right alike, because let's imagine you're in a situation where your school board is a conservative one and you're a Democrat and you don't like, maybe they go too far right on some issues, or maybe there's some other type of curriculum that's left aligned that your public school doesn't have, and you do want that. So this is all about raising children. That's fundamentally what education is about. And the question isn't public versus private. It's not teacher versus student. It's who gets to decide, which of these adults get to determine what's best for a particular child. And I think parents are in the best position. They have the best information on the ground. They're the closest to that member of their family. It's their child, no one else's. It's not the government's kid.
And they're not perfect, but they are going to pay the price for their mistakes regardless. So like they're closest to the cost, they're closest, they have the most interest, the most concern, the most love, the most knowledge. So it's not an argument about perfection. It's like compared to what, America is ideally a place where there is a marketplace for ideas and where people can share and people can say, hey, if you like this book, you can buy it, you can read it. And if we have a system that does not have that for kids for the first 20 years of their life, and then they're supposed to enter that world and be able to, like, this is about make the case for the curriculum, the book, the approach, the pedagogy that you want, and find the people who value that and let everybody do that. And it's going to be robust and dynamic, and people will change and shift, and there'll be trends that come and go. But that's more accurate reflection of what the world the kids are entering into looks like anyway.
That's exactly right. And parents, yes, they have the most information about their kids in general, but they do have the incentives aligned to get that decision right.
So you mentioned, I think, two of the big impacts that happened because of COVID. One was parents kind of seeing, oh, maybe the administration, teachers union apparatus doesn't have my kid's best interest in mind. The other was seeing A lot of the content has kind of gone way off of what they assumed it was. I think there's maybe a third that's slightly more subtle. I'd like your take on this. And it relates to technology and people seeing, okay, my kids did virtual class for a while. And multiple things happened. Some were like, oh, I don't want this. I don't want
But
them
they
to
weren't
start.
doing it anyway.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So it
Like,
was
I don't want
only
them
there was
starting
then
a
only
Zoom.
an there was only advancement to be made.
Yeah, like the downsides of just trying to replicate the typical classroom staring at Zoom, and people are like, okay, I know what I don't want. But then there was also some realization that, hey, for some subjects and some things, doing it online is kind of cool, and it means I can do it when I want to and where I want to. There's this very interesting like realization of the digital age kind of was really delayed in hitting mainstream education. And now you like quickly force everybody on Zoom and you quickly see both the perils and the potentials of
Mm-hmm.
it. And I think that led to like kind of a flowering of different approaches.
That's right, it did. And so, yeah, even before the school choice victories, we had a doubling of homeschooling according to US Census Bureau data relative to pre-pandemic levels. So families started voting with their feet even before the money followed the child. And I can only imagine what those numbers look like today with the education savings account programs blossoming all across the country. And I think there's another piece of it too. So yes, one, parents got to have a taste of home-based education. Yes, some of them didn't like it, but they weren't doing it anyway. So they went back to the public schools. But the ones who would have never, kind of had this test drive, now we're seeing them switch to the private sector or homeschool sector and never going back because they figured their kids can learn more at a fraction of the time. Their kids were less anxious and they were much more confident in their ability. Whereas before they were always told, what, you're not an educator, you can't figure this out. But you know what? You don't have to be, an engineer to figure out who your math teacher is going to be. You can still choose based on heuristic. Everybody kind of knows what the best school is. You have rating systems to figure out who the best teachers are. You don't have to be a dentist to choose your child's dentist. You don't have to be a surgeon to choose your child's doctor. You don't have to be a formal university educated person in a teacher's college to choose your child's education. So I think that the confidence was a key factor there as well. But the last piece that I mentioned in the book too is that there was a political shift too, in that politicians used to think that if they voted against the teachers unions, they were going to lose their jobs. But the opposite turned out to be true after COVID because parents started to show up at the ballot box, make their voices heard, and it became a political winner to empower parents. We saw this in Virginia with Terry McAuliffe, the former governor, who in a state that went 10 points to Biden the year before, he lost as a Democrat who said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach at the final debate. It was a huge debate gaffe. It'll go down as one of the biggest blunders politically in history. And Glenn Youngkin saw an opportunity to emerge as the GOP being the parents' party, and he made parental rights and education a key part of his campaign. Education ended up being the number 2 issue in the election, and that never happens. Education is usually the bottom on the list of priorities of voters, but it was number 2, and Glenn Youngkin won with education voters by 6 points. So there was a huge shift to the right on these issues. Trump even beat Kamala Harris on education. This was kind of an underreported story, but Atlas Intel, the most accurate pollster from 2020 and 2024, was the only pollster I saw ask this question, but they asked, who do you prefer in education? And on both occurrences, they found that Trump was leading Kamala Harris on education. And, for people who are kind of dialed into politics, this might not be very surprising, but for those who are, the Democrats have had a decades-long double-digit advantage on education. So for things to shift in this way, for me, that should send a signal to both parties like, hey, maybe we should not just listen to the teachers union. Let's listen to the kids union too. Let's listen to the parents because they're going to fight harder than anybody else. They care about their kids more than anybody else.
Yeah, politics tends to be a lagging indicator of deeper shifts that have happened, and that parent revolution title again is so prescient because like politicians will put their finger in the wind, and when it's safe to go somewhere, they'll start to go there. There's always a few that might go out and on a limb and take a risk, and
It,
they'll see, oh wow, that person did it and they won, and all of a sudden there's a shift, and it looks like, oh, it was a big political shift driven by these visionary politicians. It's not. They're
no,
like
it's
they're
from the
waiting
bottom
until it's
up.
safe.
And I mean, Milton Friedman said it best. It's not about getting the right people into office. He said that the way that you change things is by creating a climate of opinion where it becomes politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing. And we have seen a lot of these shifts in the past few years, not just from polls, not just from specific elections like the Virginia gubernatorial election in 2021, but in Texas, where you had seven of the people who voted against school choice on the Republican side kept their seats. They didn't lose their primaries. 2/3 of them did, but the 7 of them remained. 6 of them this year ended up voting for school choice after they were primaried on the issue because probably they put their finger. I don't think they had a true change of heart. I know some of them didn't. They put their finger in the wind and said, you know what? This is the right thing to do. The people are going to hold me accountable if I don't in the end. And you look at people like Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. He always opposed school choice. He started to get called a hypocrite when he was running for governor in Pennsylvania in 2022. His opponent, Doug Mastriano, who was backed by Trump, he had said, Josh Shapiro, you know what? You're a hypocrite on school choice because you went to private school, you sent your kids to private school, but I support it. Right after that, lo and behold, Josh Shapiro changed his education platform online to explicitly include private school choice in the form of what they called lifeline scholarships. It was a bill that was run by a Republican the previous year. He ultimately faltered and it ended up caving to the teachers unions in the end. But that he had so much pressure to publicly endorse school choice is a sign of things to come. And I'm hopeful that, the more the Republicans win on the issue, the more the Democrats, are going to be forced to come along sooner than later. You look at places like Louisiana, they went all in on school choice a couple of years ago, and 20% of their Democrat caucus in the House voted for universal school choice. Now, that's not 100%. It's not where we should be, but it's a lot better than 0% where we've been before. So it's a move in the right direction.
I love it. So we like to end this show on something really positive and actionable. So what would you say, regardless of the policy environment you live in, to parents? Like, what are some steps you can take right now to kind of take charge of your kids' education and help move it towards, more freedom for you, more control, better outcomes for them? Regardless, maybe you're in an ESA state, you got an ESA, great. Maybe you didn't get it because it got filled up already. Maybe you're in a state that's farthest away from adopting ESAs. What are some things that parents can do now that don't have to wait on a change in policy?
Yeah, I'd say look at which policies are already available in your school and, in your state. And most states, I believe like 48 of them now, have charter schools, for example. And even states like California, which they're coming after the home-based charter schools in California right now. The Democrats in the Assembly voted to pass a bill to restrict freedom in education, Assembly Bill 84. But they have had on the books for a while now a policy that if you're in a virtual charter school and you're doing a home-based education, you can have like $3,000 or $4,000 per student per year. And a lot of people just don't know about these things. And that's a state like California. So look into the policies. I know EdChoice has a list of a lot of different programs by states. I'd recommend checking them out. And if your state doesn't have the meaningful policy that you want today, I'd say contact your lawmakers and tell them, hey, look at what Texas and Arizona and Florida are doing. Why can't you be like them? Parents like it. And so you can be involved. Your voice matters. And I think that's kind of the message of the parent revolution is that parents thought they were powerless before, and they were when the schools initially closed. But once they banded together and locked arms, they became an interest group, more of a general interest than a special interest because they're fighting for their own kids. But they became more powerful in numbers and beat the teachers unions at their own game. So the positive note is that you are more powerful than you believe. You're a better educator than you believe. I mean, just look at a lot of the stories you see coming out of the public school system and its failures. In Chicago, they have 30 to 40 schools with 0% math proficiency rates. Come on, you can do better than 0%. So try things out, and don't let the elitists tell you that you don't have what it takes to raise your own kid, because you do. How did you figure it out before kindergarten? Well, you are your child's first and foremost educator, and I would argue the best educator your child's ever going to have. So I would take away from this conversation a sense of confidence, and also not just in your ability as an educator, but in your ability to affect policy change. And so just because you live in a state that doesn't have education savings accounts right now, I think that's going to change soon, but it's going to rely on people like you working alongside other parents and grandparents and members of your community to push for the right thing.
It's such a great point, and so many parents out there don't realize there are more choices than you realize, even in states that don't have great policies. They're just not advertised and talked about. A lot of virtual programs, hybrid charter, even just the ability to tell your public school, I'm not going to attend period 5 and 6. Like, they
Yep.
can't stop you from doing that. A lot of parents just don't even know that that's on the table. So always looking to maximize the option set you have. I love it. Corey, thank you so much for coming, man. The parent revolution, it's happening right now, and you have been talking about it, and now you are in the middle of it. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isaac. Good talking to you.